Let's talk prisons, shall we? Because prison sentences under a year, so your low kind of level criminals and all the rest of it could potentially be scrapped. This is all about looking at the fact that prisons, lots of them anyway, are very overly populated. There's a communication now and a thought process about, rather than sticking these low-level criminals into prisons, Jackie, for, short sentences, get them out, get them tagged, get them out in the community, get them washing, walls or graffiti or whatever. What do you think to that?
Well, I think there are inevitably some people in prison who probably shouldn't be in a prison. I'm not talking about the thugs and the murderers and all of that. You will get some people in there and they might be doing fairly short sentences for, it might be fraud. I'm not dismissing fraud as not being a serious issue. So I think that there can be ways to look at it. I think funnily enough, there was a debate in the House of Lords this afternoon, which I sat in on, and it was about why they've decided to try and do this because of the number of prisoners, obviously, and the fewer spaces that they've got in prisons. What was particularly interesting that we've got nearly 10,000 foreign prisoners. And we spend about, £500 million a year on them. It costs about £47,000 a head. And I would like to know why they're in our prisons and why they're not deported, frankly. So we're spending a huge amount of money there, and obviously a lot of places.
But again, it's your party that's in power.
It is indeed. It is indeed. I mean, people try and sort all sorts of things out. I think they only managed to deport last year 2,958. And out of an awful lot of people. So as I said, I have no issue in an early release if it is, it's pertinent. But also what you've got to have in place is to ensure, of course, that the probation services and those that are responsible then for making sure that these people are doing what they should do and not what they shouldn't be doing, are actually in place and they're able to deal with it. I think the point that we've raised about what they do in America and they do in other countries, and they make prisoners go and actually do some work. I think there's been failures where people have gone out to do work in the community, and apparently
should they be paid for that work?
Well, I think it's not. I don't mind paying somebody for doing something, but apparently there's people and they don't turn up. And even if they're tagged, and so then you've got people trying to chase around, trying to find where they are. So I think the system actually needs to really be, they need to start looking at this seriously. It may be they need to put some more resources in. He did say today that they were looking at putting about another 400 million in, because...
Yeah, 400 million for 800 new cells.
Well, it is, but I mean, as I said, it's not just the prisons themselves, because there is a shortage of capacity. It's how you then deal with those that you don't necessarily need to put in prison. And what you're doing if people are on early release or whatever.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a sensible policy to me. I mean, obviously people who are a danger to society should be in prison, but if you've got someone who's on a sentence which is less than a year, I suppose the question is, what good does it do to put them in prison for 6 months? Because that's hardly protecting society. They're just there for 6 months. It's hardly that they're going to be able to turn their life around.
I think they're often repeat offenders, and then in the end they've had to put them in, because they've been warned by the magistrate, said a magistrate in the House. He said you've warned them about 10 times and they still continue to do it, and in the end they have to have a custodial.
But then that's still not going to change their behaviour.
No, I don't.
It's not going to break the cycle.
I am with you there, but,
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing here is to talk not just about sentences, but also funding. I mean, I think you're right to talk about the probation service. I mean, when that fella escaped from the prison in Wandsworth, I think it was, wasn't it? There was lots of conversations from prison guards and prison officers about how underfunded, understaffed they are, how high the turnover is, which means that no one ever gets to know any prisoner. And I can't imagine that's particularly good for reforming people if you've got this incredibly high turnover of staff.
Yeah, but that escape was sloppy. The fact that, vans and lorries are not checked when they're going in and out. I mean,
I suppose I was bringing it up more just
it was like Faulty Towers.
It was a moment when sort of the conditions in prisons were sort of raised publicly. Obviously, this is a slightly different issue here. In terms of the foreign prisoners, I think I can see where you're coming from. I do think there is sometimes a assumption that a foreign prisoner is someone who has just arrived and committed a crime. And I think it's important to note, and I was speaking to a friend of mine who's an academic who works on this, actually. People who've been deported to Jamaica is sort of his particular topic. And there are a bunch of people that he works with, or was interviewing for his thesis, where, they came to the UK when they were 2, right? So they've lived here their whole life. They didn't get a passport for whatever reason. And then they commit a drug offence. I think if you go to prison for more than 12 months, it can be an automatic deportation. And so you've got someone who's lived here their entire life, has no connections to that other country, and then gets deported to there. And I think that the problem there is if you're sort of punishing people twice.
I don't think...
Is it double punishment?
I don't think that the majority of people would. There will be exceptions, I don't disagree. But we know we have got a lot of people, and they are there, they are nasty, horrible people. And we have got them in prison. It is costing a fortune.
Well,
and they should... No, my view is, if they were not British passport holders, if they're not British citizens, when they have been found guilty, clearly they've been found guilty, otherwise they wouldn't be in prison, and the evidence is such that they clearly are, they should be deported before they're even going into a British prison, frankly. They might have been in while they're obviously waiting for the case to come up. But I don't see why we're spending absolute millions on keeping prisoners here. You know, you make a contract when you go and live in a country, and you say, I'll come and live in your country, and I understand your rule of law. And sometimes people do get in trouble. I mean, not bad trouble, but they might do. But, you know, this is... You know, if you want to live here, we have a rule of law. If you break the law, then that is what you will get. If you don't like it, then you need to not be here. Go and commit your crimes somewhere else.
But what I don't understand...
It's horrendous.
...is, to me, the Tories are supposed to be the party that are tough
law
on
and
law and order.
I know.
And then, to me, it feels like you guys are just woken up one day and gone, oh, look, these prisons are really overcrowded, so what we're going to do is just let a lot of people off and keep them out of the prison so that we can cover our backsides by making prisons less full. And then it's almost like, and then we'll put this money aside to acquire this land, to build these prisons. This is what I cannot get my head around. When you've been in power for over, not you personally, but when you've been in power for over a decade, surely you forward plan, you can see certain trends, you can see that actually the rate of prisoners is going up, so we need to start investing right in the here and the now. I almost just feel it's like, is this the Tories? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Tough on law and order? Because it does not sound like that to me.
I mean, I have to say, and I'd started in politics and with the party back in the late 80s and I think every successive government that's been in, we've had problems with the prisons. We've always got problems with underfunding. There always seems to be problems, obviously, with capacity. And I think it's I think there's also been a change. There's also been a change in the way that things are handled. I mean, even back in the major government, and a colleague of mine in the House of Lords, Timothy Kirkhope, he was actually the immigration minister, and there was no messing about in terms of people that needed to be deported. They were deported. We have a heck of a job now, and even actually during the Blair years, it was much more straightforward, but we've had a heck of a job over the last few years now, trying to get anybody deported. When we're trying to get them deported, we know we've had the whole discussion about lawyers turning up at planes. We book planes, and the next thing, somebody's not going to be on the plane because there's some more evidence that they shouldn't be deported. So unless you get a real grip of this...
within the law as it stands, and it's within your power to change the law.
Well, where you are right and where I would absolutely agree is I am not sympathetic at all to people coming up with the last minute going, and here's another reason why they shouldn't be deported, when, these people, it's legal aid. We are paying for people to be represented. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, they're on the steps of the aircraft, and then, of course, there's another reason why they can't be deported. I mean, it's just...
But again, that is the system. So those lawyers, however frustrating it is, and by the way, I agree, it is frustrating, they are operating within the confines of the system. So if that is a frustration for, say, the ruling party of the country, then I'm just astonished that system hasn't been changed.
Well, I'd like to see some of them struck off, because we knew that there were cases where they'd gone undercover and there were lawyers in there we're paying legal aid to, and of course what they were doing, they were telling these people... giving them reasons to play the system.
Because I have to fly to a break
on that one.
What do you think the primary purpose of prison is?
Well, deterrent and reform. So I don't think we should punish people for punishment's sake, but ideally what you want is to have a prison system which means that people think twice before they commit a crime, and then hopefully you reform them when they're in there.
Yeah, I've got to be honest with you, and I always say to all my viewers, they know by now that it's a very good job I am not in charge of this country, because I do believe that the primary purpose of prison is punishment. Yes, of course I support rehabilitation, but to me that is secondary to making you have an awful time in prison, so that quite frankly you never want to go back there in all of your life.